Welcome back, everyone. It's been another good day because we get to talk about another gaming console, and this time we get to talk about the original Xbox 360 and how it holds up in 2021. Now, from what I've seen, I would probably recommend a lot of people to buy these older consoles, things like the original PlayStation 3s, PS2s, Xbox 360s, Xbox Ones, those type of consoles. I just feel it in my bones that eventually, sooner than later, these consoles are going to start appreciating in value an extreme amount more than we've seen in the past. When I look at these sports cards and all these people buying all these things, I don't know, I just kind of get that vibe. Again, don't take investment advice from me, but that's something I've seen. But specifically with the Xbox 360, this was a crazy console. I remember the release of this thing. I was really young when this thing first came out in like 2005 or whatever, but this was a solid console from what I could see. And even now, when I look at some gameplay of this device, when I look at, video games that I played on this thing in the last couple of years, I am shocked about the quality of games and the graphics of these games. Still, it's just crazy to me in so many different ways. Now, this thing did come out with 3 different models. So it had the Xbox 360, then there was the Xbox 360S, which came out in 2010, and then there was the Xbox 360E, which was the final 360 variant. Now, I've bought all of them. I've already reviewed all of them last year, but we get to review them again because that's what we do here. And I think one of the best things about this console was probably the fact that it had Microsoft just threw everything they had, I feel like, at that time on these consoles. Nowadays, it just kind of seems like, I'm not really too sure, like when I feel the Xbox 360 and I feel it in my hands, I just feel how premium it is and how just great it feels. Even things like the Xbox One and One S, the Xbox One X, when I felt that thing, I was pretty shocked by how cheap it felt. And then I felt like, my Xbox Series S and Series X, and I'm still shocked by how much it feels like plastic, and in some ways, it feels cheaper than my original Xbox 360. Now, I would way rather have an Xbox Series X than a, 360, but it's still kind of shocking to me that ended up being the case from what I've seen. So it is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it, but it is kind of something to keep in mind. Now, looking around the whole entire Xbox 360, starting off with the top, actually, this is where you would pretty much put your hard drive at, your expanded storage. Now, for me, I had to spend a ton of money for like a 20 gigabyte, hard drive, which is so crazy because nowadays you can pick up 20 gigs for like $3 or somewhere or something. So I think that's actually pretty funny, but I think regardless, it's still totally okay. It's really not that big of a deal. Now, looking on the front, you have, the controller support if you want to, the power button, CD slots, the memory card expansion from the front as well, and then the 2 USB ports on the bottom, which eventually ended up getting moved in a ton of different places, and we really only got like one from there in a couple different spots. On top of that, on the back though, you did get a little bit of a different setup here as well. So you had that little, like adapter thing that you can go ahead and plug into like TVs and stuff. You had an HDMI port, which was cool, the Ethernet port, the power adapter as well, which is another really awesome thing. And that was really pretty much it. A couple of different ports here and there, but most people probably won't end up using them anyway. And I think for sure, the thing that still shocks me the most, like I mentioned before, is the fact of how premium this thing still feels. It definitely doesn't feel like the craziest, most premium console, and my specific console has been torn apart so many different times because of the red ring of death, which I'll get into in a second. But regardless, I think this console was a solid console for sure, and I'm really happy that this thing eventually got the, success that it had. And I'll be honest, it had a pretty good lifespan for being a video game console. And it's so strange because most of the time, whenever, consoles come out, there's usually like a couple consoles that end up doing well, and then maybe there's like a console that doesn't do well. All consoles that came out that same time, like the 360, the PS3, and the Nintendo Wii, were killers when it came down to it. Those things ended up changing up a little bit when we looked at the end of the life cycle. Things like the PS3 Super Slim, the Nintendo Wii U, and then the Xbox 360E. Those things weren't really like the best, craziest consoles, and I don't, especially the Wii U, that was a really big flop. But regardless, this Xbox 360 was a solid console. Now, like I said, it got kind of announced in 2005. It wasn't officially released until the later part of 2005. In some areas, it didn't come out until 2006. So it's in the middle of like being 15 and 16 years old at this point. And that is insane. There are probably people watching this video, listening to my voice, that are younger than what this specific console's age is. And that is super crazy to me. It's always so insane to see those type of things. Now, pricing wise right now, as I mentioned, this thing definitely isn't expensive right now, but when it first came out, first of all, the introductory price apparently was $299, which was the Xbox 360 core. Then there was a bigger model that you can buy for $399, which I guess included 20 gigabytes of, storage on it. So I think that's cool, that's awesome, but again, these things were so expensive at that time, and looking at it now, it's so crazy. I mean, for an extra 20 gigs, you had to spend an extra $100. It's so insane in my opinion. Now, you can't talk about this console, as I always say, without talking about the controller. And the controller of this console is seriously one of the best controllers ever made. I think it's been like a consensus from so many people that this was the best controller, at least from any Xbox, but potentially from any console ever made. Now, I was more of a person who liked, like the PlayStation 3 controller at that time, or the PS2 controller, but after using this type of controller for a little bit longer, I can tell you this is a solid controller. I love it a lot. My Xbox Series X and S controllers, my Xbox One's controller are pretty much the same thing, and I like it. It looks a little bit funny when you look at it for the first time, but after using it, you realize how functional it is, and it's just a very solid console. It feels so good in the hand. If you're somebody who's going to be using this controller for a super long amount of time, you are not going to feel like you have to, stretch your hands out every like 10 seconds, or your hand's not going to be too cramped after a certain amount of time. And I am a huge fan of this specific controller type. The charges are pretty good, it doesn't, die in like just a couple of days. But I will tell you, I am so glad that, Microsoft switched away from this type of port on the back to the more standard like micro USB port on the next type of, controllers. It would have been really annoying if they had some type of like proprietary, charging port that we still had to use. I'm so glad they, moved away from that. But the original, Xbox 360 controller didn't really have that type of thing. So that's kind of how to cover that. But as I mentioned, the gaming library for this thing was crazy. You had so many different Halos, Call of Duties, some Spyro Dragons, Crash Bandicoots came out for this thing too. And I think even now in this day and age, the game graphics that you get from this thing rival some of the games that still come out. Now, I will 100% tell you, I would way rather have even the original Xbox One than the final Xbox 360, but that doesn't really mean that the graphics of those games were horrible, or that they were, unsuitable, or they were like just not worthy. That is not the case. The graphics of these games are still extremely solid. A lot of GTAs came out for this console as well. Now, the graphics may be great, the performance sometimes is a little finicky, and I will be honest, a lot of my Xbox 360s, pretty much every single one I've ever owned, does have some type of glitchiness or some type of thing to it. I think the biggest problem with the Xbox 360, at least the original one, would definitely come down to the red ring of death. That was one of the worst things to ever plague a lot of Xbox 360s, and my 360s ended up having it, at least my original one, and this was a very annoying thing. There was really not much you could do with it. There were a couple things you can do, like open it up, I think put some thermal paste on like some sort of thing or whatever, but for the most part you're pretty much screwed, and a lot of people ended up either having to pay Microsoft to fix it or whatever the case is, and it was a very annoying thing, and it's just so scary because it could literally happen to anyone at any moment of time, and that was something that really threw me off, and that really made me kind of scared of owning an Xbox 360. It's kind of like owning like some sort of like super widely popular phone, for example, that maybe has like some touch disease problem, or randomly will break on you if it's like widespread, just like the iPhone 12s with the screen problems. That was something that was kind of an issue for me, in my opinion, and I still bought it. Obviously I still used it because I didn't really have a choice, but it's kind of strange, and that was something that really didn't make Microsoft look too good. The PlayStation 3s also had the yellow light of death, and I think the Wii's had like the red light of death too, or something like that. I don't remember, but that red ring of death was crazy, and it's just so that whoever started that term deserves like a marketing like degree or marketing doctorate. That thing was crazy good. That was like such a good term. But ultimately, what I can tell you is, as I mentioned before, the Xbox 360 is still a solid console. If you pick it up in 2021, as I said before, you're probably going to be doing yourself a favor. But even more so than that, if you can pick one up in pretty decent condition, you would probably be able to resell it for more money than what you bought it for. And I think that's a really, really important thing to keep in mind. As more of these collectible items start appreciating in value, it may be just the right time for you to go ahead and pick up an Xbox 360 from what I can tell. So keep that in mind, but that's pretty much what I'm seeing so far. If you guys have any other questions or anything like that, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.